But what is compassion? When I do smaller workshops with people, I usually ask people to tell me and share with me the images that pop into their head when they think about compassion. And I'm sure right now you've had some images pop into your head as well, right? What images pop into your head about what compassion is? What do you see in your mind? Mother Teresa. And do you see Mother Teresa doing something? What do you see her doing? Helping underprivileged people. Other images? Are they similar to that? Right? The images that we usually see of compassion are these soft and gentle images. Now, I did a Google search on images of compassion, and 3 kind of themes showed up. The first theme was the heart, right? Compassion is of the heart. Like there were hearts everywhere, right? And there are many cultures, and actually all cultures, I think, in many ways, that believe that the seat of compassion and love is in the heart, right? There's a story from Richard Davidson, who's a neurologist who was studying meditation and compassion meditation. And he was putting the caps with the EEG electrodes on these monks, and they all started to laugh. And they were wondering, why are you laughing? Is it a funny cap? They said, no, because you're looking for compassion in the wrong place. It's not up here, it's over here, right? So Liz's poem as well, Liz Huerta, who wrote that poem that you listened to at the beginning, right? The last line, somewhere in his heart he heard, right? This is where the seat of compassion is. The second group of images is the Mother Teresa-like image, right? The image that you most likely have in your mind. This image of someone caring for another person, lifting someone up, right? Consoling, being with, right? And this is, of course, a very popular and common image, and it makes sense, right? Now, the third group of images, they were a little different. I mean, they were the same and different. They were inspiring in some ways, but kind of funny in other ways. At first, they made me think of Disney. But the best way of describing them is as utopian. It's really the zebra and the lion hugging it out, right? They hug out their differences. They're no longer enemies. They're good buddies now, right? And all of these images, to some extent, really represent a truth about compassion. But at the same time, seeing compassion in this kind of simplistic, unidimensional way probably makes some of you want to gag, right? And the reason for that is that you probably don't always think about compassion in this way. Or maybe if you see yourself occasionally in your life as a zebra surrounded by one or more lions, you're probably not thinking about hugging it out with a lion, right? You're probably thinking something more like this, right? Or if you're lucky, maybe it looks like this. Or better yet, maybe like this, right? The problem is when we see compassion in a simplistic way, in a unidimensional way, it creates some problems for us. One of the problems it creates is psychological. It creates compassion fatigue. Burnout. And let's face it, sometimes when you want to hug that lion, the lion's not going to hug back. He might go for the jugular, right? And so it creates a sense of victimization. And because of this, it can lead to avoidance, where people will avoid experiencing compassion because they see it as a sign of weakness. And of course, this is a big problem when leaders, people in positions of leadership, will avoid being compassionate because they see it as a sign of weakness. And this often leads to a third problem, which is an erosion of ethics. In other words, what happens is we then decide that compassion is really only available for people on the inside, right? And not for people on the outside. And of course, this leads us right back to fundamentalism. And we're back to the same problem we had at the beginning. So, let me go back here. The question is, if you forgive, do you automatically have to become a doormat? If you open yourself, your heart, to the suffering of the kids in your classroom, do you have to collapse into grief and despair? Now, these questions made me think of some research done by Adam Grant that's in a completely different field, but I think would add some insight for us. Adam Grant looked at who are the best and worst performers in the field of medicine, engineering, and sales. And he looked at three categories of people. Givers, the people we might consider compassionate. They give of themselves, no strings attached. Right? And then there are the takers. These are the people we love to hate. I call them psychological vampires, right? You know, in the worst case. The best case, they're just mosquitoes, right? But they suck everything dry, but they give nothing back. And then there's the matchers, which represents the majority, right? They follow the principle of reciprocity, right? You scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. They try to seek equilibrium. Now, interesting, first of all, that the result was the same in all three fields, okay? So, by a show of hands, how many people believe that the givers fell on the bottom, were the worst performers? Okay, nobody. The takers. The matchers. A lot of you have no opinions whatsoever. All right. Well, it turns out the givers fell at the bottom. Does this surprise you? Now, who fell at the top? Who are the best performers? Everybody thinks it was the takers. No, it wasn't. It was also the givers. So this is interesting, right? What distinguishes successful givers from failed givers? Two things. One, successful givers had boundaries. They knew that life is energy, and that when their energy is low, they have to put some limits on giving. And when the energy goes up, they can give again. So they had boundaries. And the second is they looked for win-win scenarios. They looked for ways of giving that actually raised everyone, including themselves, up. Right? My interpretation of this is that they saw themselves in the circle of care. Right? So compassion isn't just for others. Compassion is universal. And so it must include self-compassion. Right? And so they didn't become martyrs and really just allow themselves to be drained dry. They actually were able to rise and bring everyone else up with them. Right? So this is important because compassion then is not just soft and gentle, right? It's more complex than that. It also has boundaries, right? Compassion has boundaries. It includes oneself. And on top of that, compassion can sometimes be sharp. Sharp like a surgeon's scalpel, cutting open the body to remove a tumor, right? And compassion can also be bold and strong, right? As in the nonviolent resistance movements, right? Very bold, very strong, and very courageous, right? Compassion can be very courageous, as in the restorative justice movements, right? I don't know if you're familiar with the healing circles and restorative justice circles, but I mean, from my perspective, they're one of the most amazing things, right? Because what they're doing is they're dealing with a fundamental issue of fragmentation, that is a crime, right? Perhaps even a violent crime has been committed, which is fundamentally an act of fragmentation, right? And instead of creating further fragmentation, further separation through a pure, punitive measure, which, by the way, the science shows punishment alone tends to increase the likelihood of reoffenses, not decrease them. Instead of doing that, what they've done is they've created an opportunity to heal and to mend the fracturing. Now, if you've ever seen them, if you've ever seen healing circles and restorative justice circles, they are not just soft and gentle, right? Certainly they involve caring, right? And certainly they can be soft and they can be gentle, but they can also be very, very tough, right? And take an immense amount of courage. right? So I want you to understand that compassion is more complex. And compassion, for example, will compel me as a mental health professional to help people in society face their shame, their traumas, their phobias, rather than allowing silence to continue, right? Letting people off the hook, which will make people feel better, make society feel better in the short term, but nothing changes from that perspective. So compassion also compels us to step into the silence and speak up against problems in the world. So what I'm talking about here is a compassion that is intelligent. Right? And intelligent compassion does involve that universal idea of connection, that we become connected with others. And it also involves action, right? This desire to promote life-affirming change, right, to end suffering. But it also involves skillful action, right? Doing the right thing at the right time in the right place, right? And the right thing, the act that promotes life-affirming change, the act that moves towards ending suffering, might not be soft and gentle. It might be sharp or bold and courageous. Yes, it will always involve caring and connection, but it will manifest in a way that's appropriate to the situation, and it will happen by being in the right state, by being in a compassionate state.